Hold on to your hats and put on your earpieces because we have a great show for you tonight. We're going to be talking about some good old football history as well as some of the new rules for the 2025 NFL season and beyond. Always here to entertain, always here to be your portal to football history. We're ready to go here in just a moment, right after this message.
This is the Pigskin Daily History Dispatch, a podcast that covers the anniversaries of American football events throughout history. Your host, Darren Hayes, is podcasting from America's North Shore to bring you the memories of the gridiron, one day at a time.
Hello, my football friends. This is Darren Hayes of PigskinDispatch.com. Welcome once again to the Pig Pen, your portal to positive football history. And as we get ready for the National Football League season, it's about to commence. We have a lot of things to talk about, both old and new. We're going to talk about some of the rule changes in this episode for 2025, some of the numbering observations that I made that have come of light recently. And then we're going to go back in the time a little bit and talk a little bit of some old NFL and talk about another origin story of a famous college team's nickname, one that I think you'll really enjoy. So let's get right at it and start talking about some of the rule changes for 2025. Really have some interesting ones that the NFL is trying to bring the kickoff return back to the game, something that fans have been clamoring for years, ever since they've had it. So, the kickers boot the ball all the way in the end zone when they move the kick line up. And the kickoff return is such an exciting play and can really change the whole dynamic of a game. So really happy they did that. So here's what they did. They left the dynamic kick rule pretty much the same. The offensive and defensive lines, the kicking and return teams, I should say, are 5 yards apart downfield. They cannot move until the ball is touched downfield. They still have that 20-yard bucket from the goal line to the 20-yard line, where the kicker, who stands all the way down at his 30-yard line by himself, has to kick the ball, make it land in there. If it goes in the end zone, one rule changes. Now, last year it went to the 30-yard line for the return team. Now it goes to the 35. So a little bit more incentive to try to drop that kick into the bucket. Don't let it go into the end zone for the touchback. Get the 35. Make them earn that yardage by running it out. So we're going to see a lot of interesting things happening from that, including more kickoff returns as the NFL's hope. And a few of the preseason games I've watched so far were very early into the preseason when this is being recorded, of course. There's only been about 3 games played, but there has been more kick returns in my observation. Don't have the official stats on that, but I think it's a higher percentage kick returns, and people are starting to figure that out and make them return the ball. So that's kind of an interesting thing. Now, something I also noticed watching the games tonight or last night was some of the numbering exceptions. I think it was the Baltimore Ravens game. The Baltimore commentators were saying, hey, if you fell asleep for a couple years and woke up into an NFL game in the modern times, you might be confused by the numbers. And, they're absolutely right. We have linebackers with single-digit numbers now. There's players out there with the number 0, which the NFL allowed a few years ago to come back, if you remember that rule change. But one interesting thing that I saw tonight was the kicker for the Baltimore Ravens, at least in this preseason game, was wearing number 33. Now, this takes you back to maybe the All-America Football Conference, when the Cleveland Browns were first starting up in the 49ers, when they had all kinds of crazy numbers, had no numbering exceptions at all. And, some backs were wearing 77 and crazy numbers like that. And linemen were wearing 13 and all kinds of fun like that. It's really kind of a wild west of the jersey numbers. I'm not sure if I like it or if I don't like it. It was kind of nice to know that you had your numbers were limited, and the number 10 and 12 was probably going to be a quarterback or a kicker and not a defensive end or things like that. But it also brings a little bit of fun to the game. It probably really helps the jersey sales too. Some of those stale numbers that you wouldn't think would be all that great, well, now they're good. But one place where the numbering restrictions have not loosened up at all, and that is in the offensive line. The tackle, guard, and centers still have that 59 through 79, or I'm sorry, 50 through 79 numbers. The for obvious reasons, for make sure you don't have ineligibles downfield. You can identify your interior lineman a little bit easier for the umpires and, the central judges there. So that makes it a little bit easier to manage the game from an officiating standpoint, which I get because I've been there before. I understand that. And I think that's kind of a good idea and a cool way to do it. And, I guess maybe we'll end this first segment with kind of an interesting story that I picked up from a book that's really classic, the Pro Football Chronicles, which were written by a couple of gentlemen, Dan Daly and Bob O'Donnell, who were journalists back in the 80s and early 90s. And they said, hey, there's a lot of interesting things that happen in football history. Let's put them down. They read some things back then and put them together. Things that we're sort of taking for granted now, but it's really a neat little book to get if you happen to get your hands on one of them. It's kind of a cool book. But they have one story. We've talked about C.C. Pyle, one of the managers of Red Grange in the 1925 season. And this guy was sort of, he was a great businessman. He did everything for his client and for himself. Movie theater owner, some other things in some vaudeville shows and theater and things like that, and became a manager of a football player, the most famous football player in the world at the time, and made a lot of money for him and the National Football League, and even started a football league with Red Grange in 1926. But he was also a showman at heart, and he had a trick that he would do, and he actually, according to the book, sought the help of Jim Thorpe, another famous player of that same era, just a little bit before his time, maybe before the World War I. Was probably his best athletic prowess, but he played in the NFL, was the first president of the NFL. But C.C. Pyle would use Thorpe to take two identically marked quarters, and he'd give one to Thorpe, and give Thorpe an orange, and Thorpe would embed the quarter into the orange. So C.C. Pyle would use this parlor trick where he'd bring out the quarter and show everybody, hey, look at this marking on the quarter, and he'd flip around his hand, slide a hand, pull it out of somebody's ear. Who knows whatever you do with a quarter to make it look fancy. And then he'd, point across the room to the orange that Thorpe had. Thorpe would throw the orange to some suspecting, person that was in the audience. They would open up the orange, and voila, the quarter would be inside it. Well, Thorpe decided to be a smart aleck one day, and Pyle was going through his parlor trick and doing the whole thing, and the orange was opened, and 2 dimes and a nickel fell out of the orange, and boy, C.C. Pyle was red hot. Man was not known to have a bad temper, to get angry, but he was kind of peeved at Mr. Thorpe for pulling that fast one on him, and I'm sure everybody got a good chuckle out of that, except for C.C. Pyle. Just an interesting story from the other side of the game of football, and some of the things that people did in their pastime, using some of their fame and fortune to have an audience and be a showman. Yeah, after all, it's entertainment. And speaking of entertainment, we're going to take a break from this history entertainment podcast, and we'll be right back after this message and this exciting show.
If you have ever seen a sports story on TV or online, or maybe in a newspaper, chances are once upon a time you have seen it before. Hello, I'm Dana Augusta, former sports writer and now podcaster, and I host a show called Historically Speaking Sports, where we place a historical spin on a current sports headline or take the topic that most people are talking about and compare and contrast it through the lens of sports history. In this show, we talk to researchers, authors, and other sports history connoisseurs about what fans and analysts are talking about, yet in the terms of sports history. We also do a weekly top 5 countdown, highlighting moments that pertain to the subject of the show or the 5 greatest moments in the history of sports that took place that week. And to complete the show, we send a shout out to a famous sports figure or moment in sports history that both pertains to that episode or someone who had a dramatic role in sports history or an event in history that fans just need to be reminded of. The show, Historically Speaking Sports, where we put a historical spin on sports headlines. That's Historically Speaking Sports, right here on the Sports History Network.
This is Greg Tranter, co-author of The Buffalo Bills, an illustrated timeline of a storied team book. And you are listening to the Pigskin Dispatch podcast.
We look at some of these college football teams and you look at some of their names. And the last time we talked about the Cornhuskers and how Nebraska got that name. Well, another name from the Midwest that's sort of an odd name that you don't hear in too many places except in college football, at least from my aspect, is the Kansas Jayhawks. What the heck exactly is a Jayhawk? Is it a bird? Is it a mythical creature? Is it a person? I have no idea what a Jayhawk is. I had to look this up. And it's really kind of an interesting tale, and it's really specific to the state of Missouri and Kansas, the Missouri Valley. I'm sorry, but Kansas and that Missouri River Valley, and some of the things that happen there. Now, there is no such animal or creature as a jayhawk. But there are blue jays, which if we have them up in the north, and I'm sure they're the same in Kansas. But jayhawks are noisy birds when you're out in the woods, and they're almost like the sound alarm, the fire alarm in the forest. Because if you're out trying to hunt and be quiet, or just out there trying to bird watch or anything, those blue jays will squawk and do their call to make sure everybody around, all the other animals in the forest, are aware that hey, somebody's violating their space. This human being is in there, and they do that for everybody. And they are a noisy bird, kind of an annoyance, but very beautiful bird. Very colorful. They're God-given colors are very vibrant blue. If you've ever seen a blue jay, and there's also the sparrowhawk, which goes in and kills small animals, mice and rats and small chipmunks and things like that. The blue jays are also known to rob other birds of their nests and, home wrecker type of thing, and kill the young and eggs and everything else. So these two are almost predatory birds to other fowl, I guess, and to small rodents and smaller animals. And they're not very big themselves. But that is not where the Jayhawks get their name from. But the blue jay and the sparrowhawk gave the name because of their feistiness and fight to people that lived in the Kansas area. It happened on more than one occasion. The anytime that people would band together in the lawless ages before Kansas was a state, when it was just a territory and there really was no lawmen or local sheriff or anything. These were just, it was a Wild West, really. And anytime that people would band together to fend off evildoers or some threat, they were known to band together and be Jayhawks in this area because of the feistiness of these birds and banding together. So it happened multiple times. It happened, post Civil War, as people that were against slavery would fight off I guess, Confederate forces or guerrilla forces of the Confederacy who were trying to move in and take up area to have it become a slave state to help that cause of Dixie back then. It also happened when, there were some bad guys in town and they would get together a posse and they were called Jayhawkers. So it really happened multiple times, anytime people would gather together. And it seemed like when the Kansas football team got together and got a little bit momentum and started getting organized a little bit, they said, you know what? We've always had it when people grouped together, they were fiery and feisty and put up a fight, they would be called Jayhawks. And that was the appropriate name for their football team at the University of Kansas, the Kansas Jayhawks. And that's how they became them. And that's why that moniker is theirs alone. And kind of interesting and unique way to have that nickname and that mascot. So I learned a little bit of something there. Hopefully you did too on that. Another thing that I learned, going back to the book that I talked about earlier, the 1937 Los Angeles Bulldogs football team. Now, this was the first really organized professional football team in the West Coast and the LA area anyway. and they were sort of a razzle-dazzle team in 1937. So think about it, this is like, a few years before World War II. And they would do all kinds of crazy things. And one of the things that they would do is they had the befuddled huddle, where all 11 players would get up on the line after coming out of the huddle, and then when the ball snapped, they all like would crunch down like they had possession of the ball and they're diving down, and so people can't see it. Just have their arms on their stomachs and tucked in there. So it was hard for the defense to tell who had the ball. And I'm sure the defense probably just figured it out. Say, okay, we have 11 guys, they have 11 guys. Everybody just tackle somebody, and we'll tackle the ball carrier eventually with that. So that was just one of the interesting things they did. But they were the first team to spread their ends out wide. One reporter said that the ends were so wide that some of them climbed up into the first row of the bleachers of the stadium watching them. So just some wide open stuff, throwing passes, double passes, laterals, double laterals, all kinds of crazy things by the LA Bulldogs. And that made them a very entertaining piece for those who watched it, and put a little bit of fun into the game of football. And some things that we see today, that when you see razzle dazzle teams, it's kind of fun to watch, but nothing like a team that's running the fundamentals and doing it well. And they're usually the ones that have success, though. So hopefully you had some success learning a little bit about football history today, and a little bit about the football future with what's coming up in the 2025 season. So we hope you enjoyed it. I hope you had a great week. Until next time, everybody, have a great gridiron day. That's all the football history we have today, folks. Join us back tomorrow for more of your football history. We invite you to check out our website, pigskindispatch.com, not only to see the daily football history, but to experience positive football with our many articles on the good people of the game, as well as our own football comic strip, Cleat Marks Comics. Pigskindispatch.com is also on social media outlets, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and don't forget the Pigskin Dispatch YouTube channel to get all of your positive football news and history. Special thanks to the talents of Mike and Gene Monroe, as well as Jason Neff, for letting us use their music during our podcast.
This podcast is part of the Sports History Network, your headquarters for the yesteryear of your favorite sport. You can learn more at sportshistorynetwork.com.